72,000 French soldiers march into a wheat field in Belgium. Leading them is the man who once conquered Europe, the man whom kings feared, the man whom history calls by a single name, Napoleon. He had lost, been exiled, been declared finished, but he came back. In 100 days, he retook France without firing a single shot. All of Europe panicked. 7 nations declared war at once, and everything, every ambition, every glory, every imperial dream, converged on a single afternoon on a low hill near a village no one remembers the name of. Waterloo. How did the greatest military genius in history lose his final battle? Not because the enemy was too strong, but because it rained. The world on that day, June 18th, 1815. Dawn breaks over the Brabant countryside, Belgium, but there is no sunlight. The sky is low and gray, heavy with moisture from last night's torrential rain, the heaviest rain the region had seen all summer. The ground has turned to mud. The smell of wet earth mixes with the scent of horse manure and old gunpowder. Everywhere there is the sound of soldiers coughing, the clatter of metal as thousands of men try to stand up from the soaked ground. The Belgian farmers living around the village of Waterloo had fled the day before. They knew what all of Europe knew. 2 massive armies were advancing toward each other, and their wheat fields would become a graveyard. The forces on the chessboard. To the south, on a gentle ridge, the French army, 72,000 men, is waiting for orders. They are the Grande Armée, l'Armée du Nord, Napoleon's final army. Among them are veterans who had marched from Madrid to Moscow. They are not recruits, they are survivors. Their morale is sky high, because the one they follow is not just a general, but a living legend. Napoleon Bonaparte, 45 years old, stands in his familiar gray overcoat, looking north through his binoculars. He is in pain. Hemorrhoids torture him to the point that he can barely ride a horse. He has not slept for 3 consecutive nights. But in his mind, the plan is crystal clear. Crush Wellington's British army before Blücher's Prussians can arrive. Fast, devastating, as he always did. We have a 90% chance, he told his marshals that morning. To the north, the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, has positioned 68,000 British, Dutch, German troops on the crest of a low ridge just south of the village of Waterloo. Wellington, 46 years old, cold and pragmatic, does not believe in genius. He believes in terrain. He chose this position a year ago, while riding through here and saying to himself, "If I ever have to stop an army from the south, this is where I will stand." But Wellington knew something Napoleon did not, or did not want to believe. Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, the 72-year-old Prussian marshal thrown from his horse 2 days ago at Ligny, was not dead. He is leading 50,000 Prussian troops marching through the mud all night toward Waterloo. Why this day matters. This is not just a battle. This is the final trial of the French Revolution. If Napoleon wins at Waterloo, the coalition against France, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, will collapse. No nation would be strong enough to face him alone. The map of Europe would be redrawn once again by a single man. If he loses, 25 years of war will end, and the old monarchies will return, stronger than ever. The fate of the entire continent lies in the hands of the weather, the mud, and a single decision. The countdown. Napoleon's original plan was brutally simple. Attack at 9 a.m., grind down the British center with artillery, then unleash the Imperial Guard, the most elite troops in Europe, for the finishing blow. Everything had to be finished before 2 p.m., before the Prussians could appear. But last night's rain ruined everything. The ground was too soft. Cannonballs falling into the mud would not bounce. Instead of skipping and tearing through infantry formations, they would just bury themselves in the dirt and stay still. The French artillery, Napoleon's greatest advantage, suddenly became useless. His marshals advised him to wait. The ground needed at least 2 hours to dry enough. Napoleon agreed. The order to attack was moved to 11:30 a.m. 2 hours. Those were the 2 hours Napoleon gifted to Blücher, the pivot point. And this is the moment that changed everything. A moment that, if it had gone differently, you would be living in a completely different world. That morning, Napoleon issued an order that historians would later call the most fatal mistake of his career. He sent Marshal Grouchy, Emmanuel de Grouchy, to lead 33,000 troops to pursue the Prussian army retreating after the Battle of Ligny. Grouchy's mission was clear: find the Prussians, pin them down, and prevent them from joining forces with Wellington. Grouchy followed the orders exactly. That was precisely the problem. He pursued in the direction the Prussians were expected to retreat, east toward Namur. But Blücher did not retreat east. Blücher, the 72-year-old man still bruised all over from his fall, made the most extraordinary decision of the entire war. He turned his army west, toward Wellington, toward Waterloo. He marched against all military logic. He marched on a promise, the promise he made to Wellington that he would come. Grouchy heard the sound of cannons from Waterloo at noon. General Giraud, his second-in-command, pleaded, "Marshal, let us march toward the sound of the guns." Grouchy refused. The Emperor's order was to chase the Prussians. He would follow the order. 33,000 elite French soldiers marched further and further away from the battle that decided the fate of France. They never reached Waterloo, not a single man. The point of no return. At 11:30 a.m., the French cannons roared. The ground was still soft, but Napoleon could wait no longer. He did not know that when the first cannon fired, the Prussian vanguard was only 3 hours' march away from Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo began with a trick, and it almost worked. Napoleon ordered his brother Jérôme to attack Hougoumont Farm, a fortified position on the British right flank. This was only a diversion, intended to force Wellington to move reinforcements to his right, weakening the center. But Jérôme, hot-headed, arrogant, wanting to prove himself worthy of the Bonaparte name, turned the diversionary attack into a real battle. He threw battalion after battalion against the stone walls of Hougoumont. Inside, the British guards fought like devils. They closed the gates, opened them, closed them again. The French rushed in, were pushed out. Walls turned black from fire. Bodies piled upon bodies. A French officer broke the gate lock with an axe. Lieutenant James MacDonell of the Coldstream Guards led 4 soldiers to rush out and close the gate with their bare hands, while French bayonets stabbed from all sides. Wellington later called it the most critical moment of the battle. Hougoumont consumed 14,000 French soldiers. Napoleon intended to use only a few thousand for the diversion. The first mistake. At 1:30 p.m., 80 French cannons opened fire on the British center. The ground shook, but the shells fell into the mud. Many failed to explode. Wellington, as predicted, had hidden most of his infantry behind the ridge. The shells flew over their heads. Then Marshal Ney, Michel Ney, the bravest of the brave, made the most terrible mistake of the day. He saw the British moving behind the hill and thought they were retreating. They were not. They were moving the wounded. Ney unleashed 5,000 heavy cavalry. Without infantry support, without accompanying artillery, only cavalry. Thousands of horses galloped up the hill, straight into the British infantry squares, formations specifically designed to destroy cavalry. 5,000 cavalry became 3,000, then 2,000. Ney had his horse shot out from under him, the first time. He took another horse, shot dead a second time. Took a third horse, a third time, a fourth time. 5 horses died under Marshal Ney in one afternoon. Still, he did not stop. At 4:30 p.m., what Napoleon feared most happened. To the east of the battlefield, through the screen of gunpowder smoke, new formations appeared. At first, Napoleon hoped it was Grouchy. The binoculars gave him a devastating answer. Prussian flags. Blücher had arrived. The Prussians poured into Napoleon's right flank like a dam breaking. General Bülow led the Prussian 4th Corps, 30,000 men, to attack the village of Plancenoit, right behind the French lines. If Plancenoit fell, Napoleon's entire line of retreat would be cut. Napoleon had to withdraw troops from the main front to hold Plancenoit. He sent the Young Guard, the precious reserve battalions, into the village. Combat raged in every alley, every wall, every house. Prussian and French soldiers stabbed each other with bayonets in the churchyard. Bodies blocked the doors. Sergeant Hippolyte de Mauduit of the Imperial Guard later wrote, "We walked over the bodies of our comrades without feeling anything anymore. My foot slipped on something. I didn't look down. I knew what it was." On the northern ridge, Wellington held on. The British troops were shelled, charged by cavalry, and attacked by infantry continuously for 6 hours. The 27th Regiment of Foot, Inniskilling, lost 450 out of 747 men, standing still under fire without permission to retreat. An entire regiment was wiped out on the spot in formation. Wellington rode along the line with arrows and bullets flying close to him. When an officer asked him for a retreat plan, he replied, "There is no retreat plan. I will stand here until the last man." Then he whispered, low enough only for his aide to hear, "Give me night or give me Blücher." At 7:30 p.m., Napoleon played his final card. The old Imperial Guard, Vieille Garde, 5 battalions, soldiers who had never lost in history. They wore dark blue coats, tall bearskin hats, marching up the hill to the beat of drums while cannonballs tore through their ranks. Gaps appeared. They closed up. Men fell. The one behind stepped over. They advanced, as they always did. But Wellington had hidden 1,500 British guards lying flat in the wheat at the top of the hill. When the French guard reached 40 meters away, Wellington stood up in his stirrups and shouted, "Stand up! Stand up, guards! Make ready!" 1,500 men stood up from the wheat like ghosts. The first volley, from a distance of 30 meters, killed 300 French guards in 3 seconds. The second volley, the third volley. The Imperial Guard wavered. For the first time in history, they stopped. Then they retreated. "La garde recule! The guard is retreating!" The cry spread across the battlefield like wildfire. The army that never retreated was retreating. If the guard lost, everything was lost. And everything was lost. The French formation shattered. It was not a retreat. It was a disintegration. 72,000 men became a chaotic mob fleeing south in the darkness. Prussian cavalry pursued throughout the night, cutting down anyone they caught. French bands, cooks, doctors, wounded soldiers, no one was spared. When the dawn of June 19th rose, 25,000 French soldiers lay dead or wounded on the field. The British side lost 15,000. The Prussians lost 7,000. Total, nearly 50,000 casualties in 9 hours. Wellington rode across the battlefield at sunset. Around him, bodies of men and horses lay piled chest high. He said nothing. When he reached headquarters, he wrote the victory report, then leaned his head on the table and wept. 30 days later, Napoleon fled to Paris. He still wanted to fight. Parliament said no. On June 22nd, he abdicated for the second time. On July 15th, he boarded the HMS Bellerophon of the British Navy, surrendering himself to his enemy, hoping to live in exile as a gentleman in England. The British sent him to St. Helena, a rocky island in the middle of the Atlantic, 1,900 kilometers from the African coast. He would never leave. Marshal Ney was arrested, tried, and executed by firing squad by the very army he once commanded. Before the firing squad, he refused a blindfold and gave the order to fire himself. Grouchy fled to America. Blücher returned to Prussia as a hero, then died 4 years later in silence. As for the soldiers, tens of thousands of wounded lay on the field of Waterloo for 3 days before being rescued. Local farmers pulled the teeth of the dead to sell to denture makers in London. Waterloo teeth became a popular item in British high society for decades. 100 years later, Waterloo ended 23 years of almost continuous war in Europe. The Congress of Vienna redrew the map of the continent, creating a new order based on the balance of power, an order that maintained relative peace for nearly a century until 1914. France shrank back to its old borders. The House of Bourbon returned to the throne, then was overthrown again, then returned, then overthrown once more. France would go through 5 political regimes and 3 more revolutions before finding stability. Prussia, conversely, rose. The victory at Waterloo transformed Prussia from a second-rate power into a pillar of Europe. 55 years later, Prussia would unify Germany. 75 years after that unified Germany would trigger 2 world wars. 1 battle, 1 rainy afternoon, and a century of consequences. Lessons for today. Napoleon did not lose because he was inferior. He lost because he believed that genius could overcome everything: weather, mud, fatigue, mediocre subordinates, and probability. He had been right for 20 years. He only needed to be wrong once. Every time you see a powerful organization, a genius leader, or an empire that seems invincible, remember Waterloo. Not because they will lose, but because when they do lose, they will not believe it is happening, until it is too late. Echoes. The field of Waterloo today is a quiet green lawn, 20 kilometers south of Brussels. There is an artificial hill, the Lion's Mound, built in 1826 from soil taken directly from the battlefield. Visitors climb 226 steps to the top, look down, and see nothing but meadow and wind. There is nothing to show that here, in 9 hours, 50,000 people fell. And the greatest career in military history ended, not with a declaration, but with a whisper spreading across the battlefield in the gathering darkness. The Guard is retreating. Unanswered questions. Historians still debate. If it hadn't rained on the night of June 17th, if Napoleon had attacked at 9 a.m. instead of 11:30 a.m., would he have crushed Wellington before Blücher arrived? 2 hours. All of modern history could have been different, just because of 2 hours of rain. See you again. Next week, we return to the year 1241, the day the Mongol army stood only 2 days' march from Paris, then turned back. No one knows for sure why. But if they hadn't turned back, you might be speaking a very different language now.